Hey,
Hey, Dave.
Burns, what's happening?
I think we just said hello on top of one another.
Well, that's okay.
I'm doing fine, all things considered.
Great.
I won't go into the footnotes on that statement because that's a whole nother subject. Um, I've heard bits and pieces from you on this situation in Honolulu regarding the aquifer,
Ah, yes.
and maybe provide us with an update because I understand it's a work in progress, but there are implications.
Well, it's kind of interesting. Congress just passed a bill. I think it's 400 million to clean up the water supply and everything, which is all well and good. But the issue becomes the Navy is now going to court saying they don't want to go along with the ruling of the state health department, which is basically shut down the water supply and the well and drain the tanks. Well, that's problematic. First of all, you got to realize these tanks were built 80 years ago plus during World War II. And, we've had leaking of dry cleaning fluid and everything for years. The problem becomes that where else are you going to have a fuel supply strategically placed? That's issue number one. The rumor is they're going to do it in Australia. But why go all the way to Australia to get gas, so to speak? So that's part of the issue. The other part of the issue is, and I was not aware of this, but the aquifer where our water comes from is actually below sea level and it's salt free. Well, the problem becomes the fuel can migrate through the aquifer and God knows where it'll turn up. And there are a lot of people that have gotten sick from petroleum poisoning and everything else. So that's part of the issue. Uh, I mean, it's just an absolute nightmare because now, most of our islands, I think, are suffering drought conditions. And this purified water, so to speak, is being dumped into the ocean at a rate that's in the millions of gallons a day. And, that just doesn't seem to make sense. I would think that they would use reverse osmosis machines and clean everything and pump the water back into the wherever it's being pumped, for the island. But if we keep on doing this, we're going to run out of water. The water's going to be polluted. I mean, it's a lose-sum game. And aside from that, I don't have a clue because everything I read or hear about it, it's so politicized. The state versus the federal government versus the Navy, et cetera. It's just hard to figure it out.
Yeah, it sounds like a shell game where they can, in so many words, pass the buck, and as a result, what needs to be happening isn't.
Yeah, I think is a perfect choice of terms. I mean, it's unbelievable. I mean, the state directed X happened. The Navy went to court saying we're not going to comply with the state. Then the question is it states' rights? Is it federal rights? The federal government doesn't seem to care, uh, I guess. So, I don't know who's going to win or who should win or why they should win.
It was this originally determined. I'm talking about the tainted aquifer water because people had been drinking tainted water and got sick, or did the Navy, through regular testing of the aquifer water, determine there was a problem and catch it before there were health related issues?
No, I think it's backwards. Uh, the Navy, I don't think reported anything, but people were getting sick. People were getting burns on their body when they used the water for bathing, whatever. But you know, this brings up an interesting point. Now they're saying that for the last, what, 10, 15 years, the water at Camp Lejeune has been polluted for much the same reason. And then I'm beginning to wonder, you know, how long has this been going on, number one? And number two, what has anybody done about it? Well, one of the things our state health people said was the Navy wasn't testing. It just, you know, something like 4 guys ran the whole facility. I mean, it's just unbelievable.
Do they pump, if you know, do they pump directly from the aquifer into the water lines of the island, or did they put that up in water towers and then it feeds?
No. My experience when I went and inspected water supply many years ago when I was an inspector general, the water gets pumped out directly.
Yeah.
We don't have water towers.
I didn't think so. I've been to Hawaii 3 times and I never recall seeing a water tower, but I thought.
Well, as near as I know, there's only one reservoir on Oahu, and that's basically a polluted fish pond. So I don't know. I mean, you know, it's as you said, it's kind of a who shot John. I mean, the state, contrary to looking like the hurt party, doesn't, I think, have a really stellar track record. And so on one hand, it's a great chance to blame it on someone else. But you know, and you mentioned it earlier, we went through this whole, and still are, where we're ripping up storage tanks, gas stations, and replacing them all because this leaking tank problem has been around for 20, 30 years.
Right. Well, I can't imagine moving fuel depots to Australia from a strategic military point of view.
Well, you know, that was one of the so-called rumor issues, and
That sounds like a crazy Maisie idea.
Well, I'm not sure whose crazy idea it was. You know, I guess if you're going to do anything, you probably want to put it in San Diego. But then they're talking about above ground, and I'm not sure that's the greatest way to go. I mean, what a great target.
Yeah, I don't know that. I mean, you're the one who, and frankly, it's because I had never thought about it. But I mean, Hawaii was just a nice place to go on a vacation. But you've made the point over and over to me that the Hawaiian Islands are the most isolated archipelago in the world on planet Earth.
Yep.
So if you store the fuel anywhere other than there in Honolulu, I mean, it just seems to me you leave the military completely exposed. And God knows with the supply chain crisis we have today, if we can't move any other materials, how do we move fuel to the islands strategically from a San Diego or in Australia? I mean, there's nowhere close, right?
Well, yeah, because we're kind of smack dab in the middle of the Pacific, and there doesn't seem to be another way. But, you know, the Japanese may have figured it out. You know how I watch NHK. I don't watch this other stuff. The Japanese are saying that if Russia cuts off the natural gas flow, the Japanese will bring gas in on ships. And that's kind of a neat deal. You know, you bring in one of these huge LPG ships and you plug it into the system. So if the Japanese figure you can do it, there ought to be some way to fix it. But what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to look over, all the war plans. Oh God, I'm not going to go any further on that. But
Because you can't.
yeah. Well, that's
Anyways,
do.
by all means, you and Millie should start filling canteens.
Oh, I don't know. We've got our backup generator. We've got everything, and it really doesn't matter. And we're getting to the age where it doesn't matter even more. It's just that it's so pathetic. This has become this way. For example, we knew there was a leak in October and another one in November, but the cameras haven't worked for like 7 years.
This almost sounds like the military's version of what happened in Flint, Michigan, with the water crisis under Democratic rule that went on forever until the citizens were terribly sick.
Yep.
And they did it in the name of economics that weren't well thought. I've talked about it previously, but they stopped pulling water from Lake Huron and decided to pull it right out of the Flint River, which I think even to this day has its fair share of industrial waste. And, it hurt a lot of people. And, to me, if not criminal, it's borderline criminal. But you never hear anyone going to jail over any of this stuff.
Well, that triggers the thought, since you're, a critic of your buddy Brandon. You would think that fixing this ought to be one of the government's primary, efforts, and yet to have the Navy going to court to disagree with the state as a tenant, it's unbelievable. The people are getting screwed.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd say on Maslow's pyramid, water is an essential, right?
Well, yeah, and
so if government has a responsibility, it sure begins with drinking water, for God's sakes.
Well, that should be one of the major things, and particularly since we've been under a drought for so long, until this year, basically. I don't know. It's just it just boggles the mind is what it does. In the meantime, these people can't live in their government quarters, so they're staying in a hotel. And last I heard, they had to get out like today because the government wasn't going to pay for their hotel rooms anymore.
Well, they need those rooms for illegal aliens.
Oh, I don't know. Okay, your turn. I can't deal with it because it makes absolutely no sense, and you're asking me to opine on something that makes absolutely no sense.
So should we label this trouble in paradise?
Well, I could tell you about the members of our state legislature that were picked off by the FBI for taking bribes.
Are they out on their own recognizance?
I don't know, but of course we have our police chief and his wife who are in jail because they were convicted of all kinds of heinous crimes. So it's kind of an interesting situation. Whichever way you turn, the world turns.
Well, you just set the stage for a perfect segue to what I wanted to talk about today.
That's what I tried to, and I'm glad I got credit for doing it.
You're very smooth. Something that the media, I'm convinced, is purposefully ignoring for political reasons is what was a failed attempt by a Black BLM activist, also active in the Democratic Party. It occurred in Louisville, Kentucky, and he went into the campaign headquarters of a fellow Democrat mayoral candidate, a white man, a Jewish man, who is also running for the mayor's office. And he shot up the place. The mayoral candidate himself, Mr. Greenberg, one bullet pierced, I believe, a sweater he was wearing, or let's just say, make sure we're accurate, it pierced his clothing, but did not wound him. So thank God this guy was a bad shot. But the reason I wanted to bring it up is that within a matter of 24 hours, Black Lives Matter posted the $100,000 bail that was set, and this guy who attempted a brazen murder of a political candidate is back out on the street. And Dick, you tell me, because I've only seen this on Fox News. And when I say have seen it, it's not like it's an ongoing story with updates every night, but I will credit Fox with discussing it. But are you aware if network news has covered it? I know the print media, particularly the liberal print media, which is 99% of the liberal print media, is not covering it or doing it justice.
Nope, I was totally unaware of it until you brought it up. But then that brought me off on the segue about a woman that was murdered on the steps of the police station 3 miles down the street. And as near as I can tell, the guy got out and he's on bail. I might be wrong, but I think the bail was $1 million. Most people can't make bail here for 20,000, but the guy's out again and he murdered somebody. I mean, incredible. And apparently nobody at the police station knew anything was going on. So God knows what they do at the police station during the day and night.
Well,
see, that's part of what really pisses me off. You know, you got these guys that rape little kids. We've had 2 of those over the last 2 weeks. And, you know, I'm supposed to feel sorry for them because they were living in foster homes, you know, problems, this and that. You know, baloney. You do the crime, you do the time, period.
well, I used to live in Louisville, did business there, and I still have some family members there and some close friends. So I knew about this story quickly. And it's amazing to me how it's not a national story. And I say that because when that young man from north central Kentucky went on a field trip with his classmates to Washington, D.C., and stood silent in front of that Indian banging on his drum, the left-wing media was ready to lynch him. And they described racist behavior that countless videotape of what the young man was doing didn't support. And I wish I could think of his name right now, but he's brought some successful lawsuits since then. I also think of Kyle Rittenhouse. He couldn't use a GoFundMe account to raise money for his defense. He was in jail forever until he went to trial and was ultimately acquitted. And he too was pilloried by the press and by the Democratic Party as a brazen murderer. And there were countless elements of the story that were misreported, and in my view, purposefully misreported to, build a case against Rittenhouse.
Well,
This guy does excuse me, I'll be quick. This guy does a classic Banana Republic attempt at a political assassination. And he's out walking the streets. And for the 24 hours before bail was posted, the local Democratic Party, liberal press, and BLM sympathizers were wringing their hands, saying this guy obviously must have some mental issues and shouldn't be locked up in jail, for God's sakes.
But, getting back to Rittenhouse, wasn't he also pilloried by your buddy Brandon?
Oh, yeah. The President of the United States, as much as tried him in the media. And yeah, that's absolutely correct, Dick. But
It's odd because until you brought this case up about Louisville, whatever. I'd heard nothing about it. It hasn't been on the news. Can't be that important.
Well, let me tell you something. If a white guy, and I hate to bring up race, but it's a fact of life in this country. And it's a fact of life because of the Democrats. If a white man wearing a MAGA hat had gone into that campaign headquarters and shot it up, trying to assassinate Greenberg, a Jew, you would have seen headlines all over the country, and cable news would have been alive with charges of racism and hate crime. And, the guy wouldn't be out the next day. And God forbid if any PAC supportive of Donald Trump were to post the $100,000 bond, it would be absolutely sensationalized. But this thing, they're keeping the lid on it. And I think it's ridiculous. And once again, just further testimony to the fact that we don't have journalism in this country.
Well, that always brings me back to my favorite question. How do we get to this? We should probably already say that you have. No, I'll leave that alone. I'll go to my case. We're kind of like a little United Nations. I mean, we've got Polynesians in the family, Filipinos, Germans, English, you name it. And, we don't really discuss any of these issues a heck of a lot because it's not worth discussing. It's not the point. But how did it become such a point for everybody else?
Yes, I think, I don't mean to be dismissive or sound dismissive of your question, but I think the answer is easy. The Democrats, election cycle after election cycle after election cycle, play the race card and, bandy about Jim Crow. And it certainly was fanned and fueled by the Obamas during his 2 terms in office. I mean, I for one, and this is a subjective point of view, but I think race relations in our country were fairly placid prior to the Obama campaign. And I think since then, and even with Obama out of office, it's become, how the Democrats play the game. And that's why we had and we've talked about it. I don't mean to bring it up to belabor it, but we've talked about critical race theory on these podcasts, how they've insinuated that into our educational system. But, we hear inclusion and we hear all the buzz terms they use. And now it's gone so far that school boards, and particularly in colleges and universities, oftentimes are segregating students and keeping white people out of classrooms and convocations and so forth, attended by people of color. And that's ridiculous. I mean, I've never felt awkward in a meeting with, or any type of a theater, people of different colors. It's I only get this when I turn on the news. God knows I don't pick up newspapers anymore, but it's I think it's an awful comment on the state of the country. And Biden, if you recall, Dick, one of the prominent things he talked about in his campaign against Trump was he was going to restore goodwill, good feeling in the country, and particularly among the races. And I think he's done almost as much as Obama to do just the opposite, and continues to do it. So, but I didn't bring this episode up in Louisville, although it may have sounded that I did, so much to talk about the racial aspect, as I did to talk about the issue of serious crimes being done in the country. And I live down here in Texas, north of Houston. And Houston right now is leading the country in homicide rates. It has a Democratic mayor, a Democratic city council, and a majority of Democratic judges. And they are letting criminals with long rap sheets back out on the streets with very small bond requirements. And, oftentimes the money isn't coming directly from the accused bank account or his family's bank account. It's, being funded by political organizations. And by the way, one of the worst offenders in this regard is Kamala Harris, our Vice President of the United States. I mean, I would need more time than is left in this podcast to go through the people and the crimes that they allegedly committed, that she worked with organizations to post bail and get them back on the streets. I mean, she made it an art form. So something's terribly wrong in the country. We definitely have a rise in crime. We definitely have a rise in homicide rates. And then we're opening up the prisons, and those we put in prison, we're letting right back out the door. So it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that something's terribly wrong. And
Well, when they had the Civil Rights Act, everything seemed to go somewhat placidly for a while, but then it got screwed up, and you've explained why it's the way it is now. But then the question becomes, I always ask this question: how did we get there, here, there, everywhere, and how do we fix it?
well, I think the fixing is a long road, because the left is, and I don't think there's a left as distinguished from a radical left anymore. I think it's predominantly radical left. And they've insinuated themselves in so many of our institutions. I mean, the easy answer, and it really is easy if we only do it, is for voters to throw these people out of office. And by the way, to prove it can be done is just in this past week, and this is something we talked about early on in one of our early podcasts, is that parents had to get themselves into school board meetings and express themselves about what in the hell is going on in terms of curriculum and some of the other, the public revision, publication of new textbooks that are more propaganda than they are anything else. And the three most liberal members of the San Francisco School Board, and we all know how far left San Francisco is, were chased out of office. And that to me is one of the best examples I can think of to argue to people, if you get off the sofa and you vote, having done your homework, we can accomplish some things in short order, because the long-term issues that we need to address, Dick, have to be addressed by conservatives, not crazy liberals. So in other words, you can't begin working on the fix without the right people working on the fix.
Okay. Well, since I don't really think those people exist, it's kind of a zero-sum game. It's like, oh my gosh.
You're saying you don't believe there are energized conservatives that can do the heavy lifting on what the left has wrought?
Well, yeah, you know the answer to that question. There's our favorite buddy who calls periodically and wonders whether or not I've got my lifetime supply of, machine gun ammo. Uh,
That, that,
I frankly, aside from Frank Fosse when he was mayor and some of the others, uh, I think most of the conservatives I know are just as loony, if not loonier, than the left.
well, we have a strong difference of opinion on that. Now, I don't sugarcoat. I hope you don't think I do. I've been citing on my Facebook page, which is all about politics. There are some 20 Republicans right now that have very strong ties, and I would even preface that by saying suspicious ties to Red China. And I have talked about that and cited sources on that. So I don't paint all conservatives as, doing the right thing and all Democrats as doing the wrong thing. But I mean, it's kind of empirical, is it not, Dick? You look across the country, and most American cities are, forgive my French, shitholes, and they've been under Democratic rule going back to Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
Well, we're a prime example of that. Yep.
I remember Trump, and I was a road warrior. That's actually a misnomer because I flew more than I drove. But throughout my career, and I remember Trump, this would go back to 2015, 16. I read an interview and Trump was talking about if you fly internationally versus flying domestically, and you compare the great airports of the world with the airports in what we believe to be, the shining citadel on a hill, as Reagan used to refer to America, it's appalling. And, we're just talking about infrastructure, which the Democrats claim they're going to solve with another 2-3 trillion of our tax money. And, I'm not holding my breath, but the cities, particularly the core of the cities, the crime-ridden cesspools, and the Democrats think they have and Biden is a classic example, but they think the blacks are beholden to the Democratic Party, should remain beholden to the Democratic Party. And as Biden said, if you vote Republican, you ain't black. That's a direct quote, you ain't black. And I look at those wards, precincts, neighborhoods in America's big cities, and I say to myself, why, election after election after election, do they vote Democrat? And if they hand out a 5 spot to some guy on a street corner, is that how you get a vote? Or as Sheila Jackson Lee does down here in the 3rd Ward in Houston, you pass out turkeys? That justifies the vote for Sheila Jackson Lee? She's done about as little for the 3rd Ward in Houston as Nancy Pelosi has done for a congressional district in San Francisco. And on it goes. But I would argue on this podcast that even people who are left of center, who don't have the security that our elites enjoy, particularly our politicians, are starting to get a little concerned about the crime wave. I mean, is there a day that goes by that you don't see video of a smash and grab?
No, and what amazes me is how few people get arrested. You know, right now, one of the big deals here are illegal fireworks. And I was talking to my son-in-law, who's a police officer. I'm going, and my wife was saying, bring in the bomb-sniffing dogs. Check all the containers coming in. You're bound to find this stuff because the people that are smuggling it are probably getting paid off at the docks anyway. That was one side of the issue, but the other issue is they're talking about all these new plans. You know how many people got arrested for illegal fireworks over the holidays? One.
Yeah.
And they're talking about cracking down. I mean, come on.
Well, I
offered one of my, one or both of my dogs to do sniffing because that's what they do. And my son-in-law's comment was, well, I don't think the police department would like that because they have their own bomb sniffing dogs. And I went, well, they're obviously not doing a great job.
Yeah. I think that's one of the
because they're not even being deployed.
That's one of the defund the police movement that the Democrats wrapped their arms around, and that coupled with the George Soros funded successful campaigns of far left activists prosecuting attorneys that are making so many of the crimes no longer crimes in this country. They're not being prosecuted. So if you're a police officer and you do the right thing and you arrest a suspect and they're back out on the street in 2 hours and the DA's office says we're not going to prosecute, you think that officer is going to risk his life next time?
I would.
Yeah. So AOC, that wonderful congresswoman from the Bronx in New York, she got on Twitter with her vast social media following and was wringing her hands about some poor people that were arrested for shoplifting. And she pled that they were just some others who were in desperate need of getting baby formula for their babies. Of course, that touched the heartstrings of liberals everywhere. But what they stole totaled at the retail level something like $1,500–1,600. Are you kidding me? That's not a crime? Well, in AOC's world, it's not. The Democrats will pander on just about any level to get votes. And as those things happen across our society, it brings the whole structure of civilization down. I don't think that's hyperbole. I think that's what's happening, the cumulative effect day in, day out. And that's why there's lawlessness now. Like I can't remember in the longest time. Anyways, I wanted to mention that I think people in this country ought to beware of things like what happened in Louisville, Kentucky, and they ought to be upset about it.
Yeah, but
By the way,
isn't the problem, Louisville is one of the lowest vaccinated parts of the country? Isn't it entirely possible that it's the lack of COVID vaccines that have created this situation?
you know, Dick, I wish I could counter your wry wit by saying the assailant wasn't wearing a mask, but I'm not certain on that subject. So I'll have to go check.
So the whole thing could have been mass rage.
Don't make light of it, Dick. I mean, we
I'm not, because based on the news, that's how it'll be reported if it ultimately makes it out on the news.
I mean, we've certainly had assassinations and assassination attempts in this country, and I don't need to list them. You know, if you're educated at all, you can think of a half a dozen that come to mind. But I'm trying to remember if I've ever read about an assassination attempt involving a Democrat who tried to kill another Democrat. And then was back out on the street in 24 hours, as opposed to, you know, the sheriff and having to fend off the lynch mob. I mean,
but you know, you just triggered a thought. You, of course, know by now, after watching the news, what is causing all this, and that's the fact that Remington was finally convicted of the weapons that were used at Sandy Hook.
Yes, I read that, and I was appalled.
Well, yeah, but see, that's the way the world runs now, or seems to run now. I mean, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that you got a nut with a knife or a gun or something else. Let's go after the guy that made the gun. You know, I just don't understand the logic there.
Well, that to me, when I read that article, and I don't think this is a far-fetched analogy, but I thought the cartels move crack, as an example, or cocaine, in Ziploc bags and hide it in various ways to try to move it across the border.
Okay, but the answer to that is really simple. Johnson & Johnson invented the Ziploc bag. And I think what we need to do is prosecute Johnson & Johnson.
Let's see, you took away my punchline. That's where I was going.
Okay.
I mean, to me, that would be the same logic. The guy died from a drug overdose, and he got his drugs out of a Ziploc bag. So let's sue the manufacturer of the Ziploc. I mean, it's just nuts.
Well, we agree on that.
Anyways.
And the sad part is, as long as you can blame it on someone else, you don't have to take responsibility for yourself. I mean, how Remington was found guilty totally escapes me. I mean, totally gets me. And that's what brought up the Ziploc bag thing, that, you know, what is wrong?
I guess rather than putting Hillary behind bars, we should prosecute the company that made the acid that she used to burn the hard drive on her computer.
Yes, I agree.
Right. That's
and while we're at it, we might as well sue the company that built the server.
right.
Because if they hadn't built the server, she never would have been sucked into this.
Now, the last thing I wanted to mention, I don't know how we're doing on time.
You've got exactly 9 more minutes.
Well, this won't take, I don't think this will take anywhere near that long. We have a woman in the White House. Her title is Vice President of the United States. To my knowledge, the only thing she's done as Vice President of the United States after 1 year in office is she redecorated her office. She also made a quick trip over to Paris to buy some upscale pots and pans. Joe Biden of Let's Go Brandon fame early on assigned her to fix the crisis at the southern border that Biden himself created. So I found that interesting. The two of them ran on open borders, but he almost immediately assigned Harris the responsibility of finding the root cause, which, in fairness to Harris, was a bit of a conundrum because the root cause was right there in the West Wing with her. And, she could point the finger at him while they were having lunch. But anyway, she made one trip down to El Paso, which is not where the millions are coming across anyways. And she stayed there long enough for a photo op, and that's been it. But now with 130,000 Russian troops amassed at the border of the Ukraine, and Joe Biden having told Americans to pull out, but oh, by the way, the government's not going to help you get out. And he removed the diplomatic corps there in the Ukraine. And oddly enough, for a president of the United States, almost daily, he sounds like a Las Vegas odds maker talking about the likelihood of an invasion. I thought his job was to try to work through diplomatic channels to stop an invasion. But anyways, he's more content to go home to Delaware and eat ice cream. But anyways, this is a circuitous route to where I wanted to get. Last week, he sent Kamala Harris over to Europe, specifically to Germany. And he gave her yet another mission he knows she's not going to succeed at. And that is Kamala Harris, of all people, is to stop Putin from invading the Ukraine. Now, Putin is a wily former KGB type, and Kamala is an empty suit. Kamala didn't garner one vote before she dropped out of the Democratic primary. I mean, she's in the vice presidency, reporting into Joe Biden because the Democratic Party wanted a black female vice president. That's what was required for Kamala to get that job. And we used to hear years ago, Dick, about the Peter Principle. People rising to a level of their own incompetency. Well, she's there. And but this one, we haven't heard much about the assassination attempt on a mayoral candidate in Louisville, but the left-wing media sure is flapping their jaws about Kamala being over in Europe trying to work out a solution. And I just think it's utterly laughable. And even before we know the results of it, a complete failure, because to me, Joe Biden, in concert with the leaders of NATO, should be working diplomatic channels and his second in command ought to be the Secretary of State. I believe his name is Blinken. And I don't think somebody like Kamala Harris, who has not proved herself in any way, shape, or form in her first year of office, ought to be immersed in this issue.
Well, I would agree 100% with everything you said, particularly the fact that it's the purview of the Secretary of State. But you know, there's a lot of stuff in the press that Biden never did like Kamala Harris, and maybe it's just his way of making sure that she never does get anything.
I don't know, but I wouldn't be surprised if Obama wasn't the one, as I've said before in podcasts, behind the curtain and pulling the strings, for Kamala to be vice president. I believe you're right that that wasn't Biden's choice. It was forced on him.
Oh, well, I guess it's time to say goodbye. And hopefully the world will be a better place next week, but I doubt it.
Well, again, you and Millie start filling those canteens. I know you can't buy bottled water because you can't get it out of the car into the house.
Yeah, and as a matter of fact, I've got 2 huge drugs that my neighbor gave me to flush the toilet and whatever. But you know, if the power goes off, that doesn't mean the water goes off. So, I don't know. Besides that, who the hell uses water anyway? I mean, fish do obscene things in water.
I'm just glad to hear that with water.
It goes back to what I've told you for years, and it probably hasn't sunk in yet, is that don't drink anything that hasn't been filtered through a grape. You don't know what you're going to get.
Well, you and I won't be around, but 20 years from now, they'll probably find out that there's a huge decrease in game fishing in the Hawaiian Islands. And they'll find that the root cause was the dumping of all these zillion gallons of aquifer water that have been tainted.
That's probably true, but since I don't drink water, I don't think I have anything to worry about.
No, you'll be okay. Cabernet Sauvignon does you well.
Okay.
Okay, well.
Well, that's a deep subject.
Are we done, Master?
Yes, we're done.
Okay. I forgot to close the blind, and it was the last 5 minutes I was blinded here in my right eye.